Hello, and welcome to Mixology, where we launch each episode mixing up a beverage as we discuss how customer education and customer marketing mix together as scale engines to customer success. I'm Kristine Kukich, and for this session, Lauren Turner is taking the role of Shannon Howard. Lauren specializes in helping startups and scale ups shake up their internal systems, align around customer needs, and craft experiences that deepen engagement and fuel sustainable growth. In this session, we're focusing on humans working with AI and what that means for the customer's post sales journey. So gather your ingredients for the Meyer Lemon Orchard, which is a white wine based sangria. 1/2 cup frozen grapes, 1/4 cup diced green apple, 1/4 cup diced pear, 5 slices of Meyer lemon, 1 cup of pear brandy, 1/4 cup Meyer lemon syrup, which is my local input this time. It's a Portland syrup. 3 cups of your favorite white wine. I used Vouvray for mine. 2 cups of sparkling water. Freeze the grapes a day in advance and feel free to substitute ice cubes for this if you need to. Dice and slice the fruit. Add the brandy with the fruit and let it sit in the refrigerator for a bit. I like 2 hours at least. Add the syrup, the wine, and the sparkling water to top it all off, and then pour yourself a glass over ice. And welcome, everybody. We are here for season 4, series 4 of Mixology. I am here today with our guest co-host, Lauren Turner. And we are, let's see, I've made up a Meyer Lemon Orchard recipe before this. So if you haven't yet paid attention to that, pause here, go back, recipes there, mix it all up. Although it takes a little bit of time, so it's not something you could kind of do that quick. And Lauren, what are you drinking?
Yeah, I think we've got the Meyer lemon psychic connection here. I also have a Meyer lemon bush in my backyard, so that makes it a lot easier. This is a watermelon lemonade with a little bit of Bacardi in it. So pretty simple.
Oh, nice.
Just lemon juice, watermelon juice, water, Bacardi, ice. But it's pretty and it's
Yay!
so,
There you go.
yeah.
And that'll work.
Mhm.
We're talking today. For you that have been following me on LinkedIn, I have been talking a lot lately about that whole cross-functional experience. And we've been really highlighting the idea of what happens post-sale and how do we manage the customer experience in a way that isn't siloed, that gives everybody the information they need. And so, as Lauren and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, we came up with the basics of saying, okay, we can't talk about that without talking about the elephant in the room, right? AI. It's everywhere. We have to figure out what that means. But we're also seeing the kind of flipping of the script a little bit. AI can't do everything. So how do we properly define what that looks like for our teams from a human perspective and that human touch in advance or in combination with AI? Then how do we weave that into the story of the customer experience, that customer journey, right? So let's start with the first one. Where are we seeing AI really show its strength in CX in general?
Yeah. I think AI is fantastic for analysis and it's really great at condensing all of the manual repetitive stuff that people do that takes a long time but doesn't require a whole lot of depth or thought. One of the nice things that we have right now is this huge glut of data. When we talk about customer centricity, a lot of companies are still meaning we do voice of the customer, we get customer feedback. And so there's no one really at this point that has a shortage of customer feedback or coming from all of these different channels. It's just more, okay, well, what do we do with it? Because there's so much. And AI is really fantastic at that. You can upload all of this feedback, your transcripts from Gong, your interviews, your survey results, all that other stuff, and it can find the patterns and analyze them and show the trends and drive forecasts and do all of these things in minutes that could take hours or days. And that enables ultimately the ability to make decisions faster. You of course have to make sure that it's not hallucinating and you're training it on the right things and all of that background safety stuff that you need to pay attention to. But ideally, it is a really fantastic tool for condensing a lot of the manual things that don't require creativity, that don't require strategy, that are busy work. And that, I
Right.
think, ideally is really the best use for AI. That we're not at the point yet where it can replace a human relationship. It's not going to really decipher nuance, and it's basically just going to follow and do what it's told. So if you're giving it bad instructions, or you're feeding it bad data, or you've got a prompt that is too vague, you're going to get whatever garbage goes in, you're going to get garbage out at scale. And so you have to make sure that
Truth.
when
Exactly.
AI, yeah, so you have to make sure that when AI is being implemented, you're doing this with a very clear plan on what it's going to be used for, who's being held accountable for it, and making sure that the governance is working correctly, especially if you're dealing with sensitive data. Anything that involves
Right.
GDPR, anything that anything that involves like HIPAA
PII. Yep.
or yeah, or PI, like any of that. You need to be absolutely sure that that stuff is airtight. Um, but
100%. And this, I think the same is true, right? Across the board, even if it weren't just SaaS, that basic rule plays out
mhm,
where we need to set a solid foundation of usage from a more transactional perspective, right? It really is about helping us do those lower level tasks right now.
yeah, absolutely. And I think people can get in trouble when they try to do more. Now, you do have some
Well,
AI tools that have sentiment analysis and things like that, which can kind of glean contextually where a customer's head might be at, but as well as how they're able to actually handle that relationship or to be able to understand things like sarcasm or subtext or things like that, it's not.
it's hard. Yeah, they're not there yet. I was talking with Elizabeth a couple of weeks ago, well, maybe a month ago now, about how even though if we say that AI is transactional and that we're letting it take kind of help us out with those lower level tasks,
Mhm,
what does that do to this next question, really, in a sense of how do we have used lower level tasks as a training mechanism for
mhm,
people, right? We have said as a junior, whatever, you get to do these low level, routine, rote, repeatable things
mhm,
because it will give you the color that you need to grow in this profession,
mhm.
right? If we are delegating a lot of that activity to AI, how do we train the next generation of customer marketers, customer educators, facilitators, advocacy mavens,
Yeah.
right?
That,
How
that's
do we do that? What do you
well, the first thing is keeping the senior people within your corporate infrastructure to help train them and teach them the human connections and finding those insights and finding those little nuggets of relationship that you're not going to be able to do with AI, and to have your junior folks learn to be attuned to that. So let me just give you a quick example. Many
yeah.
years ago, when I was running, I won't say how many, when I was running a B2B community, we had thought talks that we would run every month from members of the community. And they were scheduled. It was like the first week of the month, and we would have different topics. And there was this core group of people that routinely were there every month. And then
Mhm.
one month, one of the guys who routinely was there wasn't there. And then he missed another month. And I'm thinking, okay, well, what's going on here? So I ended up reaching out to this person just to say like, hey, we missed you for the last couple of meetings. Like, everything okay? And I found out that he had been diagnosed with cancer and was going through chemo. So he was on some degree of medical leave and just had too much on his plate. So, I ended up sending him a DoorDash gift card just saying, "Hey, when you get your appetite back, treat yourself. We're still going to be here. Take care of yourself. We can't wait to see you, whenever you're ready to come back." And that just and once he did come back, and he did, he routinely came back to all of those meetings. He became one of the biggest advocates for renewal when that came around. We ended up getting, and I'm not going to say like, oh yeah, we gave him a gift card and that's what the outcome was. That's not the moral of this story here, in case anyone is trying to look for the transactional stuff. No. My point is that AI in this situation would have been able to notice, okay, engagement is down.
He's gone. Yeah.
They might notice this person particularly is gone, maybe. More likely, it would just say engagement is down, and that's the what, but it wouldn't know the why. And the only way that you're going to know the why is if you, the human, reaches out to the person, another human, and have that conversation. And I think if we rely too heavily on AI picking up all of those details of the customer relationship, all of that stuff that builds the relationship that can in many ways override the actual usefulness of the tool that they may be buying. Because after a certain point, I know everyone's going to say product-led growth, or, if you've got 12 other companies competing in the same magic quadrant, you're not product-led growth. You've got a dozen other competitors who are doing pretty much the same thing you are. It's going to be the relationships and the quality of your customer service that is going to differentiate you from your competitors. And so the companies that lean so hard on AI to be able to do everything, they're missing a huge opportunity. And I honestly think it's going to bite them coming back later.
We're seeing the rebound effect starting to kick in a little bit now. What I'm seeing in terms of jobs is the job definitions are different than the ones that were lost because of AI,
Yep.
right? If people where there were entire teams decimated, and some of that was AI driven, some of that is just economic in the general nature of things. But what I am starting to see is when the hiring is coming back, it's coming back different. It's
Yeah.
not the same job that was gone. It is now a new definition, and it might be a much broader definition
Yeah.
where I could have been a specialist in instructional design or references and advocacy, right? Now it is at least two or three separate hats,
Yeah.
maybe more.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of that too. And I'm also seeing more of the relationship driven roles being changed into being more, especially on the customer marketing and advocacy side, they're being converted more into lifecycle management. Actually, Erwin Hipsman has a fantastic report that he wrote about this, and you should definitely check that out. He's done a lot of work on this, and it doesn't honestly surprise me because when you look at institutionally where customer marketing usually lives within a SaaS company, it usually rolls up to marketing. And when you're talking about your CMO, they have the shortest tenure of any member of the C-suite. They're coming in usually on day one with enormous pressure from the board that they have to produce results right away. And so not only that, but they're also usually having been brought up through either product marketing, but usually demand generation. They're thinking in terms of
Yeah,
conversion funnels. And like they're thinking in terms of linear transactionary. If I spend X dollars on this number of ads, it's going to lead to this number of clicks, which will lead to this number of demos, which will lead to this number of, of purchases and revenue. And so if that's the mental model that they're applying to relationship driven things, it kind of makes sense that they're going to go with what they understand. And so what that means is the relationship based disciplines, unless you can find a way to really show if X, then Y. If we invest this much in customer marketing and advocacy and we can track the influence of those activities directly into revenue, which a lot of folks in these companies are not particularly well trained in knowing how to do, they're going to default to the thing that's easier to condense and put on a dashboard. And that's where the customer lifecycle marketing comes in. They're kind of different flavors of the same thing, but customer advocacy is really more about that relationship and building out your champions who are going to speak on your behalf, who are going to write the reviews, who are going to speak at your conferences, who are going to do those case studies. But the customer marketing, pure customer marketing and customer lifecycle is really more about marketing campaigns. You're sending upsell emails. You're putting people in a nurture track. And all that stuff can be automated, and it's very transactional because you don't necessarily know who's on the other end. You may try to personalize it based on keywords and AI, but
Oh,
it's not establishing a relationship.
right. It's not about building the relationship. It's still a numbers game. We
It's
still
a numbers
know
game.
that if we do
Exactly.
X number of these, if we send
Yep.
enough of these out about this one thing, we will get enough return on this to
Hmm.
take it to the next level, which still
Yep.
takes us down another 3% and da da da
All of that. Right.
all the way
And then you
through.
have something that you can
And
put on your dashboard and you can get more of your immediate ROI so that way you can validate your job to the board. That's why they're doing it.
I think that one of the things I'm trying to get through the roundtable that I'm doing every month for 2026 is can we create a way to measure that takes into account the import of the relationships that we build, both in customer ed and customer marketing, that talks that can then show impact against retention and against the customer health score.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the work that we do is a can be construed as a leading indicator to churn.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. And things like community sit at that intersection between marketing, customer success, product, all of those things. And that's where all that really interesting stuff comes to light because you're talking about in some cases competing philosophies and different functions that all kind of have their hands in the cookie jar. But I
It's where
think there,
customer-led growth meets product-led growth.
absolutely, and straight up marketing, and sometimes
Mhm.
sales, and whatever else someone wants to throw in sometimes. um,
Which takes us then to that whole experience, right? Customer purchases whatever that we're selling, this, the flavor,
Mhm.
and then we have a signature in place from a contract, and then we turn it over to that post-sales group.
Oh, and
And
that is the first point of breakage that often
exactly,
happens with
exactly,
these companies. That sales, if they put everything in their CRM, most of the time they don't. But
right?
if they do, it's usually just the very basics of that account. Who was the one who signed the
Mhm.
check? How much was it for? What industry is this customer in? What did they buy? How long is their contract? That very basic stuff. Very rarely are you going to see as part of that intake that gets handed over to customer success, why did they buy? Who else were they looking at? Who else was involved in the decision? Was there a buying committee? How long did it take? Who else did they talk to? And for the customer marketing folks, was there a reference involved in making this decision? Were
Right.
there were there case studies that this new customer read that they asked about or that that helped make that decision? So what happens is a lot of the time they're pretty much handing over to customer success a blank slate. And sometimes it's even worse because if you're talking about the end of a quarter where sales has quotas that they need to make, they may not intentionally, because I'm not looking to slam sales, but they may overpromise certain features or
That does happen on occasion.
on occasion, you know, um, and it may not be the greatest product market fit, but so long as they get the quota that they need, it's no longer their problem. It gets moved over to customer success. And I know that when we talk a little bit later about the cross functionality of it, there are things that you can put in place in order to help curb that, like having clawback rules
Right? Yep.
within your sales incentives that the customer has to stay a certain period of time in order for you to collect. Um, but yeah, the handoff is usually one of the biggest points between those different functions where things start to break down. Another is
I see, yeah, I see that as being like for me, it comes back to ICP a lot of the time,
yeah.
right? If we have clearly defined our ICP, then how much information is presented by sales during their part of the process is not nearly as important because I know that 80% of the qualifiers that we have in ICP will be this person, right? This company that joins us as a new customer, which means that I have prescriptive ways that I can figure out what the pain points are, because I know that with companies of this size in this industry with this many employees, these five things always come up,
Yep.
right? And we can clearly define that. We know that. It's when the wrench is in for non-ICP related activity. If we're lower in the startup range, right? If we're really truly a startup, we spend a lot more time with customers that may not be a good enough fit, but they're a really good logo,
Yeah.
right?
There's that,
And
and
if
then but
we
then
make
there are
them
two.
happy, there's so much, right?
Yeah, but there are two levels of that too. When you have a new logo that's coming on board, you can understand the typical pain points for a similar logo for that industry, for that company size, for that use case, and all those other things. Those are things that you can generally extrapolate from the market. What it isn't going to tell you is whether or not that person who is the main champion within that account, what are they most afraid of? Maybe their boss is breathing down their neck, and if they don't have a certain outcome by the end of the quarter, they're gone. Or, they put their job on the line in order to get this product, and if however they're defining success isn't met by a certain period of time, then they're going to be in trouble, or the account is going to be sacrificed. And their definition of success may not be what the vendor thinks is the definition of success. You need to understand the people in the account and what's making them tick and what they're personally being accountable for, and not just at the account level of what's going on. And of course, you can't do that with every single person. But if you're talking about your CSM relationships with your certain contacts, they need to be able to dig deeper and understand this stuff.
Well, and they need to understand it all the levels that it could be presented as
Yes,
well, right? So
absolutely.
we talk a lot about that multi-threading
Mhm.
idea, that right, we can't have just one significant point of contact. We need to have a leadership champion level of connection in addition to the practitioner exception
Mhm.
of what they either they're administrators or they may be SMEs or they may be both,
Yep.
and they own the day-to-day usage
Mhm.
of the tools. And then we also need the users. Even though we may be B2B, we still need to understand that the people using the product are going to give us the best information,
Absolutely. And they're different relationships, and this is where community might come in.
right?
That, your CSM may have a handful of contacts that they speak with regularly, but your community may have tens of thousands of users. And that's where you can identify trends in usage that a CSM may not be aware of, because the people who they're speaking with are too high above the fray to really understand from that day to day, what features aren't working well, or, what's confusing, or what hasn't been completed. And that's why you need to have such close coordination between customer success and support and product and marketing to really understand what's going on. And I bring
100%.
marketing in this, which people might be a little confused of, like, well, why marketing? This is product stuff. Well, I'll tell you why. Because if you have your support team who's just gotten off of a really upsetted, like a painful call with a customer because something isn't working, and marketing doesn't know that that call took place, what do you think the likelihood is of that customer getting some kind of upsell email the following day? Probably 100%. And then you're just making the angry customer even angrier, because
Angrier.
clearly the time that you don't want to be bugging them is when they're already mad at you. But if there's no infrastructure in place for a handoff or informing from one function to the other of, hey, this customer's mad at us, take them off the mailing list for a week, you know that's going to go out. And now you're just making things worse. And so AI can solve a lot of those things, but you need to be planful about how the interaction between all of these different customer facing roles are going to operate systemically, and who's going to be responsible for whom, and what's going to be communicated on a regular
And
basis. so that
How does
everyone
that
knows what's
communication
going
actually
on.
work?
Yeah.
Yeah, how does that communication actually work? Is it is it a cross-functional committee? Is it a Slack channel? Again, get in the weeds and really understand how are you going to build the visibility of all of that to the right people, because it doesn't help if my instructor that taught the class last week says knows in their heart that Jamie from company X is super upset about the new upload that they just got, and it blew up something that they had spent weeks on, and nobody told them it was going to affect that part of the product, and now they have to go back and rebuild everything that they had done. And it's an isolated piece of knowledge that has import.
Yeah.
And the same is also true if the news is good.
Oh
If they were teaching the course in their office hours last week, and Jamie came in and went, "Oh my God, we got this new toy, and oh, it was so cool." I was able to turn around and go, "Do bum 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 bum. Here, let me show you. Bum 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 bum." And now we have somebody who is completely pumped. And how
yeah.
do we leverage that in other ways? Because the instructor didn't have a way to tell anyone that that happened, or the CSM that was talking to somebody, or the support person that got the call for something else,
Mhm.
right? How do we massage all of that information into something that makes sense for you,
Yeah. You need to map it. You need
right?
to be able to really see how every function is interacting with the customer and map out where those interactions overlap. And then you need to assign, who is responsible for getting whatever that message out is. What format is that going to be? How often is it going to be done? You need to put the rules in place and the governance. And then once you figure out that strategy and you operationalize what needs it to be, you can probably get AI to automate some of that. I mean, especially if you're talking about things like a Slack channel, you can set up, an API between your systems,
Right.
but you need to have the strategy behind it to tell the tools of what needs to talk to each other and to inform who, when, and why. The
Exactly.
tool isn't going to do
Exactly.
that on its
So
own. So,
so that's our circle
mhm,
for the time that we have today, right? We started out talking about AI
mhm,
and what it has in transactional capability. And we drew that line that said cross-functionally, it can still be the tool that we use to tie everything together
mhm.
across all of those functions, right?
Yeah,
We can still leverage it as a way to get the information out to all the people that need to know when they need to know it.
you
Because
can. And
that's the place where we have to break down.
you can, but it takes taking that top-down approach and first planning out what things need, what people and what departments need to talk to each other at what point, using what format and why, and then finding the tools to connect it. What I'm seeing a lot more often is people get in love with the tools and they find a cool tool and then they plug it in here and there, but they don't know exactly what it is they're doing with it. And so it may have some functionality, but it's not really enacting an underlying strategy. And that's where you get a lot of these missed connections and a lot of this mess. You need to start with the plan before you pick a tool.
Back when I was in teaching all the time,
Mhm.
my one of my taglines was the better the plan, the easier the execution.
Yeah.
And it's still true, right? As we start having the ability to work with the generative AI tools, Claude and its entire suite, Google and its entire suite, Chat and its GPT land of
Yep.
tools, the new guy Perplexity that's in the mix, Copilot has become a much stronger tool than
Oh
it
yeah.
was in the beginning,
Mhm.
right? So with all of those, and now we layer that on to all of the tools we already use that are incorporating Gen AI
Mhm.
in ways, and we do run the risk of the next shiny thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Of
Especially
being
when,
attracted to the way it does something and not necessarily why it does it.
yeah, and especially since on its face, that stuff just feels easy until it isn't. Like the concept of vibe coding. Okay, you've got these tools. You tell the system what it is you want it to do, and it throws out some code. Cool. But unless you actually understand Python, you don't know what to do with the code that it gives you, and if it breaks, you're not sure what broke. You need to find someone who understands the code to be able to troubleshoot and fix the things that come out of it. And this is where I think a lot of companies are
Yeah.
getting stuck. That, even earlier when we were talking about the financial constraints on these things, that they were replacing humans with bots, and now they're realizing that they're not even saving any money because what they were paying in salaries, they're now paying in credits. You still need someone to oversee the process to be able to pick out the bad code and be able to understand what's going on and fix it and iterate. Otherwise, you're talking about essentially people blindly trying to figure stuff out in a language that they don't understand.
Well, I talked to a programmer earlier this year, and he said he doesn't write code anymore. All he does is proof code. He's
Yeah.
editing
Mhm.
existing code or troubleshooting against code that fails in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. But you need a person to be able to look at that code and understand what they're
But
looking at.
he's also got 30 years experience
Yeah.
writing code.
Hmm.
Python just happens to be the latest language that he learned how to
Sure.
speak or
Yeah.
write or code in, or however you want to phrase it. But okay. So again, wrapping it up,
Mhm.
first question, what's AI's role? Answer was
AI's role
transactions.
is to, yeah, is to consolidate data, to summarize things, to take care of the transactional repetitive motions that are time consuming but not strategic or creative or relationship based.
Question, yeah. Question two, how do we reintroduce the human touch? Answer,
Analysis. I think that everything now needs a balance sheet. You need to be able to prove the value of the human relationships and triangulate what happens to accounts that have been
without
put
it.
through that automated, and show where the mistakes are. It's not going to matter to a company that doesn't inherently care about its customers until you're showing that it's going to impact their wallet. That's the language they understand. And you need to put it in those terms of here's how you're losing money because your lack of a relationship with customers is driving them away from you, and you're creating churn, and you're creating loss of opportunity. All of those upsells and cross sells that you thought you were going to get, you're not going to get anymore because your customers are frustrated with you. And the reason they're frustrated with you is because they've been talking to a chatbot when they need a person. You need to offer some degree of both, or some sort of escalation process where there's actually a person in the mix who can help make your customers
You can start to
feel,
evaluate. Yeah.
feel heard and
We could
understood.
evaluate where it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then that takes us then to being cross-functional post-sale. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
And basically, again, we can certainly leverage AI on that
Mhm.
one, but we need to establish, and the underlying theme throughout all of this today has been governance.
Mhm.
We need to establish the procedures, and we need to build governance around those procedures so that we can be more successful across the
Yep.
board, right?
Governance, communication, and ownership. Understanding who is
There we go.
responsible for what, who needs to inform someone else, what happens when that information gets transferred, where it can be found, how often it's going to be delivered, and have an established process for all of these things so that no one is kept in the dark and everyone's in the loop. And you have to think about it from the customer's perspective. The customer, they may be talking to someone from product, they may be talking to a CSM, they may be getting some marketing emails. They could have 5 different relationships with the company, and none of that feels like a uniform brand experience if these 5 different functions aren't communicating with each other.
Exactly. And that is basically the summary. Figure out how to make that work and golden, right?
Oh yeah.
So moving forward, Lauren is available on LinkedIn if you want to talk some more with her. Mixology is available on YouTube. With a traditional LinkedIn, you can follow me on LinkedIn anytime you like. And moving forward, we are instituting the Post Sales Alliance on YouTube with live streams and a community. So it is at Post Sales Alliance on YouTube if you want to go in there and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed here already, please do. That'll get you into the entire series for season 4. And we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Lauren. Thank you for coming.